I mean, I would do it on purpose.
It will be a great story for you.
Anyway, yes, for the children.
Yes.
So I'm going to just talk a little bit about 3 minutes to introduce the idea that K-12 teachers, how many of you either are, have been, or might become a K-12 teacher? Okay. And K-12 meaning.
Excuse me, what is a K-12 teacher?
A teacher who teaches kindergarten through high school.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Obviously, you aren't one. Okay. And the rest of you who aren't, I'd love to hear from you afterwards and what you're doing here. And not just afterward, but we're going to have, I think, quite a bit of time. So I'm going to set it going by saying that in history and social studies, and I'm going to be using those terms interchangeably, in history/social studies, the bane of the world is the huge textbook. And many, many teachers, even teachers who try hard, teach the textbook. Their job is not to teach the textbook. Your job is not to teach the textbook, those of you who are K-12 teachers. Your job is to teach history, or social studies, or whatever the heck it is you're teaching. And the textbook is a tool to be used, but it is not what is to be taught. And you've got to go beyond it, and you especially have to go beyond it if you're talking about Vietnam. Because the textbooks do a terrible job on almost everything. And they certainly do a terrible job on Vietnam. I want to give you an example from the beginning, not the beginning of Vietnam. That'll be here in a minute. Julian will do that. I'm going to talk about the very beginning. The textbooks start with Native Americans. They do a poor job about Native Americans. I want to say a couple things about my books. I'm delighted to sell most of the ones I brought here at a cheap price, but I'm not here to sell my books. They're doing great without me. I'm so happy. This one, Weiss, my teacher, told me, how many of you read this book? Okay, I thought that you looked intelligent. It's actually the best-selling book by a living sociologist. So there are sociologists that have done better, but they are dead. So it talks about, and then the antidote is teaching what really happened. It talks about how to teach about Native American issues too. This book, Lies Across America, talks about historic sites all across the country, including 2 in D.C. They get history wrong, and what to do about them, and stuff like that. And I guess my most recent book is specifically aimed, particularly right now, at the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. It's called The Confederate and Neo-Confederate Reader, and it talks about the fact that we teach the Civil War completely wrong, from secession to the end of it, and gives you the actual facts. So it's not just me saying it, it's the Confederates saying what they were really up to, and so on. So that's my show and tell. And this book also just came out again. Lies, my teacher, told me about Christopher Columbus. Okay? And it's particularly useful for maybe high school, I think high school, but especially middle school teachers, because it comes with a poster inside. You stick it up on the wall in October, and blam, you've got students thinking, because it has quotes from primary sources written at the time that show that what quotes from the textbooks paired with them, that show the textbooks to be exactly 180 degrees wrong. Okay? And once you realize that about Christopher Columbus, who never even got to the United States except for Puerto Rico, okay, we're trying to get started, everybody. Once you realize that in October, then you're ready to deconstruct George Washington, Vietnam, or anything else that comes along the path. So from the very beginning, and let's start with Columbus, and I already mentioned Native Americans, but from Columbus, we teach the list of heroes begins with the list of explorers, right? Columbus, and even before Columbus, starts with Prince Henry the Navigator, he didn't go anywhere, but he got people going around Africa, right? And then you got so on. And I just wanted to mention one as kind of a setup. How many of you have ever heard of Vasco da Gama? You've heard the name, right? Can I have a volunteer? What the heck did he do?
He rounded the Cape of Good Hope.
Yeah, who's saying this? There she is. Go ahead.
He rounded the Cape of Good Hope.
Yes, he discovered India. He went all the way to India. And now, of course, there is the issue of discovering a place that has more millions of people than Portugal ever did, but that's another matter. I agree with that he did. See, I think that Christopher Columbus discovered America in exactly the same sense that about 30 years ago I discovered oregano. I did, it was new to me. It was good. Anyway, yeah, he discovered America. I mean, India, and he was the first person to go around there. Now, actually, it turns out that he wasn't. The Africans did it the other way around, even 1,000 years earlier, but never mind, they weren't white. Okay? The first person to discover something is white, right? So that's part of the problem. But I just wanted to read you one other sentence about da Gama, because this covers, he's even before Columbus, BC. And so this kind of, here's what he did on his second trip. The question always is, what did these explorers do on their second trip? And the answer is, he went to Calicut, which is not only a kind of cloth, right, but it's also a big city in southern India. And he was shelling it, that is, firing on it, okay? He comes with these caravels that are mounted with cannons mounted on. It's the naval equivalent of Genghis Khan and the massive horde descending on a town in Hungary or someplace. It can't be dealt with, you know? We don't have to worry about those people because we've got them so completely outpowered at the moment that we don't have to treat them as even what we call in sociology conflict equals. So here's what happened. This is by a Portuguese person who was there, I think, or who was there shortly thereafter, and then, you know, I'm going to quote it. The Portuguese, I'm adding that word, caravels, that's the name of the ship they had. Caravels went to, they were shelling Calicut, and then they stopped to give Calicut a little chance to respond to what they were demanding. They were demanding that Calicut expel all of its Muslims. Had a whole bunch of Muslims. Muslims ran some of the banks and were traders and so on, and instead start dealing with the Portuguese. And then, just as they were stopping shelling, about 20 Arab ships, Moorish, or whatever you want to call them, that's from the here, Muslim ships, came in from the west to trade with Calicut, because that's what they normally did. And the caravels, the Portuguese caravels, went to them, I'm quoting, and the Moors could not fly as they were laden. You understand what I'm saying? And the caravels brought them to da Gama. He then ordered the boats to go and plunder the small vessels, which were 16, and the 2 ships, in which they found rice and many jars of butter and many bales of stuffs. And so they take all that into their ships. Then da Gama commanded them to cut off the hands. This is a sad story. I think 5th graders can handle this story. Okay, so if you teach any, I don't know about 2nd graders. I think I wouldn't teach this to 2nd graders. But I know 5th graders can handle it, and for sure high school students can handle it. I may get talking about it, that's all right. Then da Gama commanded that, I know what's going, so that's why I'm getting sad, to cut off the hands and the ears and the noses of all of the crews, and to put all that into one of the small vessels. When all the Indians had thus been done to, he ordered their feet to be tied together, as they had no hands with which to untie them. And in order that they should not untie them with their teeth, he ordered his crews to strike upon their teeth with staves, and they knocked them down their throats. And they were thus put on board, heaped up on top of each other, mixed up with the blood which streamed from them. And he ordered mats and dry leaves to be spread over them, and the sails to be set for the shore, and the vessels set on fire. And there were more than 800 Moors thus done. And the small vessel with the fire, never mind about the fire, and all the heads and the ears was also set on shore under sail without being fired. These vessels went at once on shore, where many people flocked together to put out the fire and draw out those whom they found still alive, upon which they made great lamentations. That gives you, is that important? I submit that's important. Okay? I think there's a guy named Hugh Masakela, some of you maybe know him, he's a South African musician. He has a song, Waskow, no friend of mine. Okay? Now, the question is, what did we do on the second voyage? Columbus on his second voyage did somewhat similar things, not quite as gruesome as that. We could discuss what Fernandez did on his only voyage, etc. Right? And so this is something that relates back down with them to what we do in Vietnam in certain ways. Okay? And so if we start at the beginning by going beyond the textbook, we get a fuller picture of what the United States has often been about. Yes, I know this was Portugal. Okay. This guy, Julian, is going to start early in Vietnam and take you through an exercise that shows how you can go beyond the textbook.
Thank you. My name is Julian. I work with a great organization based in DC, Teaching for Change. And we partner with another great organization, Rethinking Schools, to put out the Zinn Education Project, which has a number of lessons. We're going to do one today, but has a number of lessons related to Vietnam. We actually have a whole packet of lessons just focusing on Vietnam. Okay? I've done this lesson many times with my classes. I taught for 7 years in DC, 4 years, 11th grade. And I love this lesson because it talks about Vietnam right after World War II. Now, in the beginning with my students, I have to do a brainstorm session, and what do you know about Vietnam? And to their credit, they write LBJ, they write Nixon, they write North and South, which is good.
Yeah.
They never mention Kennedy, they never mention Eisenhower, they never mention Truman, 11th grade. They never mentioned any of these presidents. So in their minds, Vietnam began in 1965 and ended 73, 75, in their minds, and many adults as well. So I want to split the room into two groups. Let's say roughly this side is one part, right down this line. So if you can scoot over a little bit, and okay, this is one side, and this side is another part. All right. So this side of the room, you're going to represent the Viet Minh. You can take one and pass it around quickly. And this side of the room, you're going to represent the French business/government leader. Now, all of you should have, or most of you, some of you might have came a little bit after, you should have a template, right, graphic organizer with some questions on it, and you should also have the declaration, Vietnamese declaration, okay? Can someone read me the questions on the graphic organizer? There should be 3 questions on it. The fishbowl questions, yes, thank you.
Should the United States feel threatened by communism in Vietnam or in France?
Okay, thank you.
Let me read all 3.
Please.
What should President Truman do about the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence? Support it, ignore it, or oppose it? And number 3 is, should the United States government grant loans to the French? And if it supports loans, what strings should be attached?
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much. So what you're going to do, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more. Now, this is a very, very condensed version of what an entire class would be, but I just want you to see the structure of the lessons that we provide. What I'd like you to do, you can talk with someone next to you, you can talk with a group of people. It's too big of a group for everyone to shout together, but at least talk to someone next to you and try to answer those questions in the mindset of the person or the group that you are portraying. So if you're the Viet Minh, you're answering those questions in the mindset of the Viet Minh. If you're the French government/business leader, you're answering it in the mindset of that person, that group. Okay? Any questions about that? And once we're finished with that, we're going to have an opportunity for both sides to share their opinions. Okay? There won't be any physical altercations, okay, hopefully. Or maybe, I don't know, you're all adults. But, no disclaimers here. But there should be some clash when you share your ideas. Okay? Are there any questions about the instructions? Yes.
I'm just very confused.
Okay.
You're not calling it French Indochina as it was?
No, not at this point.
Well, that's what it was at that point. I mean, before.
Well,
yeah, the whole point was when the French were beaten again through Truman, instead of saying, okay, in China, you're on your own, that, you know, the way we're all meant to be, he comes in and takes.
right, but for this lesson, right, we're thinking about it from a high school student and just introducing them to the war.
I just meant historically. I couldn't understand where.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. We're talking about right after World War II.
We didn't have that.
Yeah, well, it's still French Indochina trying to get independence.
Okay, hi, excuse me. My name is McReynolds. I work with Julian on Teaching for Change and is an education project. And part of the reason we were collecting everybody's email addresses is that this whole conference, this room, is an incredible group of people. These lessons have been developed and put online. We now have 49,200 teachers who signed up to access the lessons. But what we really need is help reviewing these, adding more, coming into classes for any of you who are local as speakers. So what we'd like to do is Julian's going to do a mini, just so you get a flavor of what the lesson's like, because so often lessons are lectures and then kids don't get to step into the history and experience it. But we will send an email out with a link to all the lessons And we really would welcome this kind of feedback. And the thing is, we don't probably have time to go further now, but that's exactly the kind of feedback that would be really helpful to get. And you'll see other things too. We always send our lessons out for feedback. We always get a lot, and luckily they're online, so we can keep editing. So
I apologize.
yeah, no, it's not. No, it's important. This is it's very important. Kids have gotten the wrong information for so long. It's very.
I feel it really is critical.
Yeah, no. So I'm going to get your card and I want to follow. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move forward, please.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move forward. So let's take about 5 minutes, talk together, try to answer the questions on the sheet, please. We have two sides. We have the Viet Minh on this side, correct? The French business leaders, government leaders. All right, so if we have more time, we can stretch this out, but I will just ask people to answer the questions representing their group. We can have multiple answers, but let's try to go one for one. So let's start with the Viet Minh. Should the United States feel threatened by communism in Vietnam or France?
No.
Why not?
Because neither Vietnam nor France is trying to conquer the U.S. Nobody's trying to interfere with our system of government. So why should we interfere with theirs? But of course I'm getting Viet Minh.
Right. No, that's right. That's correct. Do we have a response from this side? Remember, you're answering in the role of that person, not yourself. I heard somebody say right over here. I was like, what is going on?
Okay,
Oscar Ward for business.
okay, well, we decided, we said that, yes, we should tell the United States that they should feel very threatened about what's going on in Vietnam because already the people in France are turning to communism. And it could spread to the United States and then well, it could, and very important to be vigilant of this. And also, Ho Chi Minh is giving out land to the poor people, and so, we can really frame this as manipulating the poor people. And so, this is the way that communists are going to spread there now.
Okay. Yes.
Well, so I have to say, we said no, of course, because we're the Viet Minh, and we're launching a propaganda effort, propaganda in the good sense of the word, a persuasive, informational effort, to win over the people and the government of the United States. So of course, we want to make every argument we can why they shouldn't feel threatened. However, I have to say, we can't.
Are you in your role?
Well, kind of. Can I just?
Let's just tell me, no, please.
Yes, I'm in the role of a high school student who's not completely naive, who's not content with being spoon-fed answers, who's not content with being manipulated by being given an answer, a text with a question that presupposes what the answer is going to be. If this is the level of sophistication that is assumed in a high school student, then I think that I'm very disappointed by the intellectual expectations that are made. This presupposes an extremely naive and unquestioning student, and it's precisely questioning, not spoon-feeding, the correct answer that should be taking place in high schools. And this is therefore taking entirely, I could see where trying to set up a debate and role-playing would be a good thing in general. But this is assuming a Viet Minh member who's answering a question about what should the United States feel, who has no concept of geopolitics. If I were a slightly less naive Viet Minh member with a concept of geopolitics and a concept of communism and anti-communism and how they interact.
Well, I will respond in the.
You're assuming that all of these people are of a very low intellectual caliber, both the Viet Minh person and the student.
Not at all. Well, let me respond to this, okay? What this activity, and I've taught this activity for years, sir. I've taught this activity for years. The point of it is to counter the dominant narrative that is taught about the Vietnam War. This is just one lesson. This is just one lesson. And you must understand that most students, in my experience, I can't speak for anyone else, but in my experience, this is brand new information. They're only seeing it for the first time in their entire lives. Some adults, they don't know this. You do.
Why are you spoon feeding them?
This is the first time they're being introduced to it,
a question that has a correct answer.
There is no correct answer. There is no correct
You're
answer.
spoon feeding them.
No, sir. And I'll give you a second. This is to build critical thinkers. There is no correct answer. Many times the students will ask me, what's the correct answer? I will say, I don't know.
You're not teaching critical thinking.
I am teaching critical thinking. I am teaching critical thinking.
It's changing the discussion.
Yes,
Yes,
because
I
I'm
did.
being critical too.
You made your point, Let's move on to the next one. You're off track. Really off track.
That's the right question. You're asking the right question. How would you do it better?
I have taught world history in DC public schools, and I'm an Arabist. I'm a Middle East studies person. And so I bring that hat to it, and the level of concept formation of some of these children is really very basic, but they can understand unfairness. And so what he's doing is he's setting up a role play as a critical thinking, and then you debrief after this, and then the children come out of role. It's a very useful exercise. I taught world history in film last year, because the children could not have even read this level. They were at about a 3rd grade level. So they understood the concepts, but it's not brainwashing, it's really making it relevant to their experience. I talked about absolute power, and I said, you know, who has absolute power that you know of? And that was the concept. And they got it right off the bat. It was their gang leaders, you know, and so then it came to relevance. So this is something that they would enjoy, and it would be quite apt for kids that, you know, barely show up for school.
And one more comment. I'm going to yield back to Mr. Long to respect his time.
And I don't want to criticize this role.
Oh, no problem.
However, I teach a very specific group of high school students. These are returning high school dropouts. So they range in age from about 18 to about 50. The younger ones in that group have come back to high school because they want to get their high school diploma so they can enlist in the military. I don't have the time to go through it. We only meet once a week.
Right.
And I can't do role playing with my groups. But there is a right answer when you're talking about the history of Vietnam that incorporates critical thinking in a major way. And what I was hoping to get today would be specifics about how to reach young people who, because of the economics of the day, are there just so they can join the military. I have to focus on Vietnam. I have to do it quickly.
I would like to talk to you more, and you, sir, also after, but just to wrap it up, he left now, but that's okay. So focusing on critical thinking, back to your point, you know, if the students have never heard this information before, this is the first time they're hearing it, this lesson is very powerful, and we build off of that. In terms of the right answer piece, I meant that a lot of times the way history is taught, especially textbook, is that there's only one narrative. So this lesson and lessons like it from the Zinn Education Project have multiple perspectives to give the information to the students, and then they come to their own conclusion. I'm not telling them what to think. I'm asking them, what do you think about this? This is what the Viet Minh wrote. This is what they thought. What do you think?
Present them with enough information, you will come out with one answer. I think. I mean, I find it to be the case.
Okay, we can talk about that. We can talk about that. I'm sorry we have to wrap up. I just want to give you a sampling of what one of the lessons is like. So thank you, and thank you for the comments. I appreciate it. Mr. Lowe.
Can you open one of those, the words for?
That's it is stuffy. Is that what you mean?
Is an alarm going to go off?
Yeah,
We'll find out.
Let's try.
I don't think so.
No, I'm sure it's not. Push.
There we go.
Excuse me. I got it.
There's a recovery.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
Want me to open this one too?
I'm going to call on her. I don't know.
So could you give us an overview of what is being taught in the high schools? Like, are most districts having any interest in a curriculum? Is it just like catch as catch can for individual teachers to try to find resources? What's the state of it?
You can speak much more in terms of, but in my experience, the main narrative that's taught is 65 to 73, 75. That's what we had. That's what's pushed on us. It takes a teacher to go outside the textbook and go to, like my teacher told me, go to People's History of the United States to bring in another perspective. Not to say that is correct, but to bring in another perspective and then have your students come to their own conclusions with multiple perspectives.
And the curriculum for 65 to 75, what is that like? Is it?
I mean, it's like Kennedy gets assassinated, the United States gets into Vietnam. That's
nothing about the
that's
anti-war movement or anything.
Oh yes. I was talking about. I was just giving you a time frame, but that's Kennedy's assassinated. All of a sudden, LBJ sends troops into Vietnam. Like the United States was not there right after World War II. There's nothing about Truman, nothing about Eisenhower, nothing, or very, very little.
Yeah, thank you.
Back to this question. We do have 49,200 teachers now signed up for this education project in every state in the country. And so we will, with the email address thing that's following up, we're going to go send you information if you can. A lot of it has been by word of mouth. We have 20 teachers signing up every day, middle and high school, social studies, language arts, and now K through 12, I mean K through elementary school. I'll say elementary, not K through 6. So we really need help spreading the word and supporting the effort, but it's very exciting that many people are trying to teach outside the textbook.
I had a question about, I had thought that we would be talking about rewriting the Vietnam narrative, Vietnam War narrative. And I don't know, this may not be involved with that, but is Jim, is your organization involved with this project? I mean, I'd like to know what's going on with the Pentagons and who is the committee rewriting this, a little bit of information.
Yeah, I should have said something about that at the very beginning because unfortunately it's in the title of this workshop. And let me just say that I think the reason why we're having this entire conference, it was sparked by this perhaps bizarre, I'm just going to use the word bizarre and I will, bizarre attempt by the Congressional Appropriation and then by the Department of Defense, previously known of course as the Department of War, to write its own narrative of the entire Vietnam War, and that's what we're going to be watching unfold in the next 10 years. And so I think it behooves us here, and the thousands they got there, I'm happy to hear that it's so many thousands, and the people that you know and who contact us, to keep that from happening, or keep that from being the only voice. The leadership of the conference has already met with the Pentagon people on occasion, I think on 2 occasions, I don't know. I'm not in it really, I just signed this stuff as they handed to me if I agree with it, and so far I agree with it. To mitigate the one-sidedness of the narrative that they are likely to tell and have been telling so far. But to get back to your question, really, what most teachers do is they teach what's in the textbook. Now, this is terrible. What is in the textbook? Well, my one claim to fame is that I'm the leading expert in the United States, in fact in the world, on what's in United States history textbooks, high school history. Because to write this book, I read 12 of them, and now I've read 18 of them for the second edition of it. So that's the one thing I know. It was a near-death experience. I ever tried to do it. And what's in the textbook is mostly the what. There is almost no consideration anywhere in the textbook of the why. One of you two guys, I wasn't standing up, so I don't know which one, brought up this issue about sophistication and so on. The textbooks don't get into any sophisticated questions, any why questions, like why did the United States disregard the Geneva Accords? You know, why did all these things happen? One thing after another. And that's the very first paragraph of how does of my handout, which I don't have any more of, but hopefully you've gotten. How does the United States teach about the Vietnam War? How should it? Which is, I wrote for you. This is all new. Well, it says, it speaks to all this kind of stuff. Not only that, teachers, most teachers, now that I mean 60%, I don't mean more than that, but about 60%, don't even teach the textbook well on Vietnam because it's controversial. Now, I'm going to argue it isn't controversial, actually. There's data in poll after poll from 1970 all the way up to the present that shows that the percentage of Americans who think that the war in Vietnam was wrong politically, how can you argue otherwise? At least to lose it was wrong politically, wasn't it? And wrong morally. The percentage of Americans saying that is 70 to 80% in every poll. So that's not very controversial as controversies go. But nevertheless, it is controversial in certain ways. And I'll give you some information in it that teachers many teachers want to avoid controversy. So there was actually one study, and I cited it as my teacher told me, that shows that in I think it was a national survey, the amount of time spent on the Vietnam War in a year-long high school history course was 5 minutes. All right, 5 minutes. So not much is said. Now, I'm not sure that's still true and that was accurate exactly. But even if they spend a week, you know, there are 44 chapters or whatever in the average history textbook, and so you can't spend a week, not in a typical, maybe they spend 3 days. You read the textbook, there are 45 pages in the textbook. So I want to give you some other ideas of how you can get teachers and how, if you're a teacher, how you can get students to go beyond the textbook. Okay? And the very first thing I want to suggest is critique the textbook itself. Okay? One of them has gotten better. And bizarrely enough, it's called the American Pageant. I say bizarrely because it's one of the worst textbooks in many ways, and it started out terrible. But it's gotten better on Vietnam. But I don't particularly argue for it because I don't argue for any of these textbooks. But you might want to get a copy of it. So here's a couple of ways that you can get students to go beyond the textbook. One is have more than one textbook available. It turns out that if you go to used bookstores, U.S. history textbooks are the cheapest things in them. In fact, many used bookstores won't even handle textbooks because there's no message, because they can't sell them for 50 cents. But if they do sell them, they are often 50 cents. I know a woman who teaches about 3 miles from here. She has 30 old history textbooks. She keeps them in a rectangular laundry basket, plastic laundry in the corner. And she's got fewer than 30 students. If you've got more than 30 students, make that 40. It costs you $20 instead of $15. I mean, it's not a backbreaker. And when she gets to a given topic, she does this on various topics. She says to her class, okay, go get a book. And you go get a textbook. And so everybody goes, gets a different book. Some people get the same book each time because that's how the kind of person they are. Somebody else just picks one that's pink or whatever the heck. Actually, they're all red, white, and blue, so you can't pick one that's pink. They really are all red, white, and blue on the covers. Just about every single one. All right, so you go get a book and you find that in terms of the why, your book doesn't say anything. Your book says the opposite of what her book says, blah, 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 you know. And you realize history is not just learning facts. It can't be because you got, and another interesting thing to do is to get different editions of the same book. Like get an old copy of the American Pageant, which was terrible on the war in Vietnam, and then see how the narrative has changed. Some of the books have gotten, on the whole, the books have gotten slightly worse on the war in Vietnam. In the last batch I surveyed, which was those written between 2000 and 2007, compared to the first batch, which was written between 1975 and 1994 or so. So we've actually gotten slightly worse on the war. Now, another thing you can get students doing, and I talk about it in there, if you read my chapter on, there's 2 chapters that treat Vietnam in here, but the chapter on how the textbooks and stuff treat the Vietnam War, I focus on the pictures, the photos. And one reason I do is because it avoids some of the arguments that otherwise we would have right in this room, and for sure we would have if we had a room of this group plus a bunch of Rush Limbaugh listeners, all right? That is, it doesn't, I don't give my interpretation of why we got into Vietnam, for instance, and then say, these textbooks are wrong because they don't agree with me. Instead, I look at the photos. Now, what about the photos? Well, I assert that there are 7, and you might say, no, there's only 6 or there's 11. I don't care. But I say there's 7 iconic photos of the Vietnam War. I'm going to give you an example of one of them. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. Everybody in this room. And even a bunch of 20-year-olds know what college students know what I'm talking about. That's how iconic that is. Another one is the one of the young girl running naked towards the camera. Okay, I have 5 of these specific ones and 2 generics. Okay? You can read my selection, see what you think. Well, it gives a metric that students can use them to critique their textbook, because I assert that almost none of the textbooks include even one of these, let alone more than one. Okay? What do they have instead? GI slugging through a rice pack. Okay? LBJ getting greeted by a bunch of people at Ponson, at the big naval base when he visited there. Pictures that nobody remembers. So, in terms of the sophistication of students, yours was so far ahead of, I mean, they at least knew that there was a North and, I asked a bunch of junior and senior college students at the University of Vermont when I taught there. These were all social science majors or education majors. I asked them a bunch of questions on the first day of class, a class I was teaching called Why is my teacher told me so I could get my book done? And it got oversubscribed because of the flamboyant title. And I'll never forget one of my questions, a bunch of my questions were just factual questions, see what they knew. I asked them, the war in Vietnam was fought between blank and blank. I was interested to see whether they would say North and South Vietnam or the United States and Vietnam. Okay? To my astonishment, 22% replied the war in Vietnam was fought between North and South Korea. You can't make this stuff up. Okay? And this is, of course, because they're in that 5-minute group, right? Their teacher skipped that chapter because it's controversial. Nevertheless, North and South Korea. One student wanted half credit for getting North and South correct. So we have to start with where they are. But anyway, so then have them critique the textbook on how many of those photos they have. What do you think of that? Why don't they? Etc. And then that's one way you're already thinking then about that. And then move on. Okay, what does the textbook say? What do all of these 30 textbooks say about why we fought there? And then maybe you need some outside information. Then you help supply some, you help them go to other sources that they come up with, and somebody had a handout. Yeah, both of you first.
This is a little off topic, but it's about involving the Vietnam vets. My father was a World War II vet, right, at Normandy. I mean, I can't believe the number of books, and we're all saying, oh, these vets are dying. Well, this is a chance to get the vets are probably now retired, you know, they might have time to go to schools, but to let the kids actually interact with the vets. Is this happening?
Could I comment on that?
Yeah.
I've had...
and the Vietnamese.
Yeah, that was my next point. Guest speakers, it says.
Okay. I had a veteran come to my classroom, but before he came, I had some of my students who are Vietnamese. They did a whole Vietnamese cultural day for our class with the Vietnamese Cultural Center. They came in and talked about the food, the music, the people, the culture, because a lot of times students, they just learn Vietnam War, and that's it. But they don't understand, they don't have any empathy because they don't know about the culture. So I agree.
I think making it live.
Let me agree with you in that. No, not yet. I want to say one more thing. Exactly. We have all these community resources. And one of the things I'm supposed to say, having to do with the title of this, the Pentagon is going to be emphasizing exactly that. Have a vet talk in your class. And I just would propose you really maybe need to have 3 speakers. You need to have somebody who is a proponent of the war, and was then, somebody in your community, and even small towns have this person, who was an opponent of the war, a member of the peace movement, and third, a vet who may be not quite on that axis, may be having some other things to say.
Or a Vietnamese person.
Exactly. You know, Vietnamese people that before. And that's great. You know, you can have more than one person.
I wondered if either of you used movies in the classroom. I mean, even now, I feel like I learn more about Vietnam from movies.
There's 2 terrific movies, for instance, about the My Lai massacre, and one of them should be used, I think. And lots of other stuff. Okay, you should.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. 3 daughters went through the city public school system. When they invited me to the classrooms, I was told, just keep it simple. Don't get really political with it, because they didn't want any real confrontations. They didn't want to change minds. And as a Vietnam veteran, I only just recently joined the American Legion, because all of those guys are all pro-war. If you try to say anything negative, they just go nuts.
Well, that's maybe a good reason to have more than one speaker then, because then that legitimizes both speakers. So a couple hands up in here. No? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, how do you teach this to, say, kindergartners and first graders?
Anybody want to answer that?
Have you?
No.
Oh, okay.
Have you? I mean, you know, here's what I would say to that. I do have an answer in a way, and I've given lectures, I give workshops for K-3 teachers. It is not appropriate to lie to kids at any age. Now, that said, maybe there's some things we don't teach to K-3. You know, I have personally taught 5th grade twice, so I know what I've done. That is for 2 days each. I didn't get fired. I was only supposed to be there for 1 day. I think 5th grade, based on that and based on talking with other 5th grade teachers, I think 5th graders can handle anything appropriately taught. I mean, you can, but I don't know about younger, and I'm not sure that we need a Vietnam exercise in kindergarten. You know, maybe that's something for 5th grade. That said, I mean, I remember a parent arguing that we should not teach the Holocaust at all in high school, because let them be kids. Well, shoot, only 1 out of every 6 Americans ever takes a course in history after they leave high school. If we can't discuss stuff that's real in grade 12, when the hell can we discuss it?
We're talking about K through 12.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not talking about college, but I'm not sure we should teach it in kindergarten. Yeah, wait a minute, I've got it. He's saying this over.
Yeah, you mentioned the Pentagon's project to whitewash the war. I'm with Veterans for Peace, and there is a campaign on their website. It's called VietnamFullDisclosure.org, and it kind of refutes what the Pentagon is doing. I also had the chance a few years ago to go into DC public schools to do what we call truth in recruiting, where the military recruiters get up in their own spiffy uniforms and tell all kinds of things.
Become a radar operator.
And we got to go in there and refute what they were saying and tell the kids their work conditions. I mean, the recruiters come in and you can get money from college, but they don't tell you that you have to pay into a fund while you're in the military to have access to that. And number 2, when you get out, you may not even qualify for college because of your background. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways to kind of counteract what the Pentagon is doing, and the culmination of this Vietnam Full Disclosure campaign will be on Memorial Day. We are going to take a bunch of letters to the Vietnam veterans from Memorial, letters written by community members to people on the wall to tell what Vietnam meant to them. And as a disabled Vietnam vet whose name almost wound up on the wall, I mean, I'm involved with it. I'm going to write my letter and be down there on Memorial Day with the members of Veterans for Peace.
Let me make just 2 quick comments. I only made a comment about these opinion polls. You need to be armed with those if you're teaching. And you probably want to that. Though I put those to at least one of them in Rising Teacher told me, but they're easy to find because people, parents, right-wing parents, may accuse you, the teacher, of being controversial. You take it right back. No, you're actually being controversial. This is the majority opinion. So you need to be armed with that and bring your principal on board. And the other thing I think you need is this. This you got in the packet, right? It's 10 points. I thought it was so cool that I actually Xeroxed a bunch of them for you because I didn't know if they were going to hand them out. But they handed them out to you, so I'm going to save mine for the next time I give a workshop. I think every one of these 10 is very important, and it also speaks to why we don't want to leave out the Vietnam children, because that implies it's not that important. But it is important, and this tells you why. Okay, there's some other hands up.
This one head off.
I'm sorry.
Just going back to opinion polls, there's another one that was done recently, I would say 2 years ago, asking about whether or not the Vietnam War was right.
Yes.
And overwhelmingly, children and people under 20 thought it was, that we did the right thing. So that's a very important reason why we have to teach the war and the impacts of the war.
Let me just say, we need to reclaim patriotism. I want to make a distinction between, I know all my talks these days, no matter what it's on, but this distinction between patriotism and nationalism. And I'll take my definition of patriotism from a guy named Frederick Douglass, some of you have heard of him. He says, now forget his sexism, he was an anti-sexist, but this is how everybody in America talks about patriotism. I call him a patriot who rebukes his country for its sins and does not excuse them. On the other hand, a nationalist says, my country's right or wrong, and furthermore, we ain't never been wrong, and if it was just totally by accident, we're really the best country in the world. We are. All right, and I submit to you that nationalism is not patriotic. That we do not need nationalism. And so we need to take the flag back, we need to take patriotism back, and that's what we're doing. Yes, sir.
And as I say about teaching little children.
And I was suspended from school in Iowa, and this became a Supreme Court case. And the Supreme Court ruled that kids do have rights in the schools to speak up and express themselves. So it's in a lot of the history books and in the curriculum. And now I travel, I'm a nurse, but I travel around the country speaking to kids about the war and kids' rights, and this case called Tinker versus Des Moines, etc. So anyway, I'm available for any of you in your classrooms or to speak to children. I do speak to kids down to the second grade kindergarten level about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, etc. It's called the Tinker Tour, and we have a little table downstairs.